My name is Claire Schaefer-Olekchak. I'm the Executive Director of Sustain Dane. I'm glad that you're here. For over 25 years, Sustain Dane has helped businesses, organizations, and individuals across Dane County learn, connect, and take action for sustainability. We have 4 key program areas. The first one is education and workshops. Like what we're doing today, every quarter we have programs like this on different topics. We also run workshops just for businesses. We run workshops on recycling. We run workshops on energy efficiency and water stewardship. Our second area is the Efficiency Navigator. This program focuses on affordable housing and sustainability. We're able to improve affordable housing and reduce the cost of utility bills and increase health and safety for the residents. We also do work in waste reduction. That includes running the free drop-off sites for food scraps at local farmers markets and diverting that into compost so it's not going into the landfill. And then our last area we focus on is youth leadership. This includes education in elementary schools and also a summer program called Powerful Teen Leaders that focuses on green career pathways for teens on the north side. I'd like to start by noting and recognizing our new and renewing members since we last got together. Thank you to Habitat Holistic Solutions, Goodwill, Tribe 9 Foods, and the IPM Institute, 350 Wisconsin, City of Stoughton, DC Engineering, Easy Office Products, Klein's Floral and Greenhouses, Madison Children's Museum, Madison College, McFarland United Church of Christ, Midvale Community Lutheran Church, Midwest Solar Power, the Overture Center, TLJ Coaching and Consulting, UW Health, Wisconsin LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Wisconsin Eco Latinos, and 4 of our individual members. Can we please give them a round of applause? And there's an even bigger network. I am not going to read all of these members and partners that make our work possible. We have a leaf, tree, and forest levels, and the membership that we offer helps include inspiring education, professional development, and connections like this through the networking and volunteering. We also provide customized resources and support to help individuals and businesses meet their climate goals. And membership comes with complimentary access to programs like the one you are at today. So please consider joining Sustain Dane membership and also consider supporting businesses and organizations that value sustainability. All right, April is Earth Month, one of our favorite times of the year. I'm going to quickly go through some of the programs that we are offering. There's more information on our website at the bottom of our homepage with the Eventbrite area if you want to sign up or learn more. So as I mentioned, the food scrap locations are now active. So you can start saving your food scraps, get them out of the landfill, and drop them off at a farmer's market or at one of the Dane County food scrap stop locations. This Friday is our workshop for businesses and organizations, the Accelerate Sustainability Workshop. We have 2 volunteer events on the calendar. Our Efficiency Navigator program is accepting applications. So if you own a small affordable rental unit or know someone that does or lives in one, please encourage them to apply. Starting in May, we're offering a 4-part home efficiency and electrification course. So if you are interested in looking at your own home and charting that path to electrify it, this will be a course for you. We're going to be working with MG&E engineers to help you go from idea to this is the plan to make that happen. Recycle Better is offered online over the lunch hour starting first week in May. It's a 2-part series, so get all your tips and ins and outs about how to recycle. We have a passive building tour on the 15th of May. And then our summit is our end of the year program, brings everything together, a really kind of joyous and informational celebration. The date for that is going to be November 6th. And November's going to be here really fast. So mark your calendar. Get it on there right now. All right, on to our program today. So we're here to talk about data centers. Data centers are interested in Wisconsin. They're expanding across Wisconsin, and the use of AI is rapidly growing as well. I feel like we are all learning in real time, and today is part of that. We're going to be looking at the growth of data centers and how that's going to intersect with our climate goals, with environmental and social health. We're going to share some of the considerations for communities on how to start preparing and engaging with data center developments. And we're also going to be discussing what areas need more research and more information. Today we're going to have a 10-minute presentation to start, which is going to level set and kind of get us all hopefully on the same page about data centers. And then we'll have 45 minutes of a panel discussion, which will include time for questions and answers. The panelists have offered to stay afterwards, so if you have more one-on-one questions or conversations you want to have, they're going to be here after that. So now, please help me in welcoming Anna to give our opening presentation.
Good morning. I'm Anna Haensch. I'm an associate research professor at the University of Wisconsin, and I research things that sit in the intersection between artificial intelligence and civic life, and I think we can agree that data centers occupy that space. So I'm here to do a little bit of level setting and just kind of baseline establishing before we move into the panel, and hopefully answer all the burning questions that you've had about data centers. So to begin, let me answer the most basic question of all. What is a data center? A data center, in its bare bones, it's just a building full of computers. It's full of computers that sit in server racks that don't have screens. And what they're doing is serving up data, computation, and other cloud resources, specifically for people who are not in that building. So it's a room full of computers for people who are somewhere else other than that room. And data centers are not new. They've been around for quite a while. This is the most typical kind of data center you'll see. Let's see. Ooh, I can point. This is called a co-location facility. This is one that's on East Washington, a little bit that way. And this is a data center that probably rents out server space to local businesses. These have been around for ages and ages. They are totally unremarkable. And when you see reporting that says things like, Wisconsin has 52 data centers, the great majority of them are these, and this is truly a nothing to see here scenario. Another kind of data center that you'll occasionally hear about is what's called an enterprise data center. And these are data centers that serve corporate or enterprise clients. This here is an aerial shot taken from Google Maps of the data center that's owned by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It sits in Fitchburg. It takes up a little more than an acre. It is about as infrastructure intensive as any kind of industrial process, but it's not particularly remarkable. It's not putting any kind of unprecedented strain on the grid. It doesn't require any kind of new infrastructure build out. Again, I would qualify this as a nothing to see here type situation. The third, and by far the most compelling kind of data center, are these hyperscale data centers. So these are the data centers that are being built out all around the country right now, but are particularly in the crosshairs of Wisconsin. And these are typically being developed by, in partnership with a lot of the big tech companies that you hear about, Meta, Amazon, and so forth. And these suckers are enormous. They are taking up hundreds of acres. They require specialized infrastructure build out for electricity, water usage, and they really require substantial lifts at the local, state, and federal level in terms of the kind of permitting that has to go on in order to make these things happen. So everything we're going to talk about today is going to be squarely inside this box right here of hyperscale data centers. If you haven't done so yet and you're curious, I have a link here which I'm not going to play, which is there's a Reddit thread from a couple weeks ago of a person who did a drive-by at the Port Washington Data Center, and you can watch, and it takes almost like a minute and a half to drive past it. The Port Washington Data Center is about 900 acres, which is about the size of the UW-Madison campus. Great. So when we talk about data centers, we typically are having that conversation sort of hand in glove with artificial intelligence. So I want to make that connection explicit so we can understand why these things exist together. Artificial intelligence is something you probably are accessing from your smartphone or your laptop. When you access it, you're probably going through something like ChatGPT or Gemini, Claude maybe. And what you're doing is you open your laptop, you probably write a query in some kind of a little prompt line. When you do that, the question you ask is being sent out to a data center. It's being sent across high-throughput fiber optic cables. It's landing on some server rack somewhere. So it's landing maybe right on that little node there. The computation is happening. Beep, boop, boop, beep. And it's getting sent back to you via either an API service or maybe a cloud service or something. But the point is that all of the AI is happening somewhere else. It's happening in a data center. So when we talk about the hyperscale data centers coming, the reason this growth is so profound right now is because AI is having this like really mega build out moment. This raises a question that anyone interested in sustainability should be asking, whether that growth is actually warranted. So I will say that current data center capacity on the ground does not meet forecast data center need for AI demand, but AI demand is a very squishy, confusing thing that requires close interrogation. So there was a period of time when AI was being shoved into absolutely everything. Probably this clicker would be AI enabled if I bought it today. It won't be forever. There will be some stable equilibrium we reach where we know like how much AI we need. We're not there yet. So how many data centers we need is very much an open question. So if someone approaches you and says, oh, but we need this data center, I would just say, why? Data centers growing in the US, it's been quite a takeoff in recent years. So for sure, this is a plot here from 2024, slightly outdated, but all my points are still salient. This is a plot from 2024 that was demonstrating how much data center had grown between 2014 through 2024. Significant growth from kind of a flat plateau up to, some growth. And this wide open margin you see here of like what we're gonna need in terms of data center energy consumption, that's a big band of uncertainty, and that's because of that unknown AI forecasting question. If you look at what actually happened in 2024, US data centers consumed 184 terawatts of electricity, which was below even the most conservative estimate. So already, based on what happened in 2024, we're down. We're using less than we even thought we would. So we're beginning to reach that stable equilibrium point. The infrastructure considerations for building a hyperscale AI data center come in three pieces. Those three pieces are one I touched on already, which was the long-haul fiber optic cables. You need the fiber optic to pass the data, or else you can't do anything. You need electricity to power the thing, high voltage electricity, if you're lucky, and you need water, which we'll say more about in a moment. So when you look at this map here, this is from the National Renewable Energy Lab. If you look at where data centers are situated around the country, you will likely find them sitting next to fiber optic corridors and high voltage transmission lines. And typically water, although there is a build out in the American Southwest that remains kind of baffling to me, but never mind. So if we zoom in on Wisconsin, this is a map from a database that I've been keeping here based on media reporting. This is the lay of the land presently in hyperscale data centers in Wisconsin. The various colors indicate where in the planning pipeline the data center is. The size of the circle is the size of the data center. And you can definitely see that these lie along these high voltage corridors. There's basically this kind of corner shaped thing here where all the data center planning is going on. And the most recent ones that I added to this map are still very speculative, not clear which direction they're going to go, but we have Beloit down at the bottom, and then there's this Grant County data center that's supposed to be coming in Cassville, a town with population 400. Now, notably, there aren't any high voltage lines near Cassville, but I do believe there are some just over the border in Iowa. So this is something just to keep an eye on. Right, now, the discourse around data centers in the state of Wisconsin seems to hinge on these four basic topics. I'm not going to read this slide to you. If you want to take a picture of it, I'm also going to provide a QR code in a moment for these slides, so you can download them. Yeah, I know. Any conversation that I hear about data centers among municipal leaders and voters, it hinges on these four things: jobs, economic activity, tax revenue, Wisconsin as a tech hub, the last one being the kind of most amorphous to me. All of these things carry benefits and they carry risks. Data centers don't fall squarely in the all risk, all benefit category. It's a mixture of things, and it's up to us to decide which we want to take and which we don't want to take. If we zoom in on the current state of play in Wisconsin, just from an energy perspective, we have, these are the kind of most mature under construction projects right now. Port Washington, Janesville, Menominee, and Beaver Dam. These account for nearly 4,500 megawatts of power. that's a demand shock onto the grid that doesn't currently exist. All of these might not materialize. So for example, Menominee has been paused for a while, and I suspect not coming back, but it's a bit of a whack-a-mole. Menominee goes away, and Cassville appears. So I think that the number remains. 4,500 megawatts of power currently exist on the grid. The megawatt to household conversion is a little bit of a tricky one, so I'm not going to give you precise numbers, but I will say that that is millions of homes worth of power. Millions of homes, certainly. Maybe the difference between like 1 million and 10 million becomes a bit of a like academic exercise, but millions for sure. It is surely standing in the way of efforts to retire coal-fired power plants. And it is not clear how to make this 4,500 megawatt demand shock an avenue for renewable energy. Just as a sort of thought exercise, or maybe actual exercise, I was curious what it would take to power all of these data centers with solar power, because that's sometimes you hear like, sometimes there are press releases that are like, oh, it's going to be 100% renewable powered. Okay, well, what does that actually look like? If you wanted to power 4,500 megawatts of data center with solar power, based on the capacity to output ratio, you would need to install 2,500 megawatts of solar panels. And if you look at the actual like panel to output, current state of the art, that would be almost 100,000 acres covered in solar panels. This would be a solar farm that you would see from space. So trying to actually power 100% of data centers with solar power is just completely unfeasible. You know, we can start to bring in wind. There's a lot of conversations around nuclear power, small modular reactors. This is all really an open field, but it would require work. I'll also add that this big demand shock coming from data centers is not the only place we're experiencing a demand shock right now. There is a tremendous need for electricity and infrastructure build out in the US. This is 2024. This is the actual demand for energy, broken down by other uses in yellow, and then I've split out AI and non-AI data centers. This was in 2024. In 2030, you see we have pretty enormous growth. We have growth in the data center space, but we also have growth in the everywhere else space. And the growth in the everywhere else space can be chalked up to things like electrification of vehicles, electrification of home heating, and probably biggest of all is the onshoring of manufacturing, hugely electricity intensive. I'll also say that forecasts are all over the place. So I did my best here to indicate the dark blue is the like lowest, most conservative estimate, and then the stripy blue is the most kind of out there estimate. So the reality, I would bet the reality, you have to take my word for it now because I have the mic. I would bet that the reality sits somewhere like shy of the worst case estimate, but we'll see what happens. This is alarming because prior to 2024, the compound annual growth rate of electricity in the US was essentially zero for decades. Because we had our grid, we pushed our electricity through it, and it was just kind of like serving its purpose. So the fact that right now, we have a forecast 2.4% compound annual growth rate is huge. The last beat I'm gonna hit here is about data center fresh water usage, which I know is something that's enormously important, particularly here in the Great Lakes region. Data centers use water in two ways. The first way they use water is through cooling the data center. You have to cool all those GPUs, CPUs, and the way that happens is by pulling fresh water out of a body of water somewhere and cooling either in an open loop or a closed loop. In an open loop, that heat gets carried away through a cooling tower. In a closed loop, it runs through a closed loop, and it gets recycled over and over again. It should, in principle, be better for water to use a closed loop, but of course, it's running through some industrial process. It's getting very dirty, and eventually, it has to be discharged somewhere. The other place that we use water is in the actual generation of electricity, which is far more water intensive than the data center cooling itself. So in conversations about data center water usage, my professional opinion on this would be that conversations around cooling the data center itself are a bit of a red herring. The place to look is the electricity generation because it's 211 billion to 17 billion. Both enormous numbers, but off by an order of magnitude. I'll leave you there with my QR code. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you, Anna. What a great start to the program. We are going to send the slides out to everyone after the program. So get your QR code and they'll come out. So please grab a seat, Anna. We're also going to welcome Kathy Kuntz, who is the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, and Paul Robbins, who is the dean of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at UW. You've been working really hyper-locally in Dane County on data centers. Could you share some about what you see as the regional impacts that the data centers are having and how kind of the jurisdiction is kind of playing out in the development process?
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and thanks everybody for being here. This is a terrific turnout. It speaks to all of the folks who feel like this issue is relevant to them. So when I think about, I work for Dane County, and that means that especially as data centers have started happening, jurisdiction is a thing I talk about a lot. There are two kinds of jurisdiction I want to touch on. The first is you're the decider. What entity of government decides things in this process? But then there is you are affected by the decisions. So on the decider side, it's relatively straightforward. To locate a business in a community is a local zoning issue. We have, over decades, developed zoning codes that are not discriminatory. So that means that if your zoning code doesn't say anything about data centers, then it's going to be categorized as light industrial or commercial warehouse or something, and the decision is going to be based on what the code says a business like that has to do. The local unit of government can't suddenly make new rules midstream. So part of our challenge is that we've got this rush of data centers, and it takes a while to change zoning code. In Dane County, we have a county board working group going through the process of, should we add something to county planning code that is explicit around data centers? So that's the jurisdiction about, can it be here? Then there are all the issues that Anna touched on about energy and water. And those issues tend to not be the local jurisdiction. They tend to be issues that are the State Public Service Commission. So the State Public Service Commission is who's going to decide with the utility how the energy rates work for this new entity. So when local residents are opposed to a data center and saying to their local leaders, this is going to raise my energy bill, you have to guarantee to me it won't, that's not in their authority. And so we're like, a lot of these conversations end up at cross purposes. So, that's who decides things, but then who's affected by things? So when a data center was contemplated here in Dane County, initially it was in the town of Vienna, which works with the county on planning. So we had an official role. As that discussion transitioned to it's going to be annexed into the village of DeForest, the county has no authority in villages. So now we had no role, no official role. The conversation I kept having with QTS, though, was, but I have countywide emissions goals, and if you're building a big thing in the county that uses more than double the total amount of electricity the whole county uses, that's relevant to me, and I'm going to keep calling you and asking questions. It's just who I am. Many people in the audience know me. I'm a little persistent that, slowly they went, she's not kidding. She's going to keep talking to us. And I feel like we were making some progress thinking with them about how to make that facility greener. Now that facility's on hold, we have, though, as Anna talked about, these facilities that are happening in eastern Wisconsin. So those are not even in our utility service territory. But electricity is a grid, and it's a grid across multiple jurisdictions. So We Energies, the utility that will serve those new data centers, has announced and worked with the Public Service Commission to get approval for new gas plants because their load is going up. They also so recently announced they're going to delay the closing of coal plants because the grid needs all that electricity. That is also going to affect our Dane County emissions goals because we assumed that the utilities' voluntary commitments to green the grid were going to happen on the timeline the utilities said, and now I think some utilities might be changing their mind about that. They haven't made official announcements, but so it affects us, but we're not at the table. The other issue that affects us when they're a little bit closer is most data centers use diesel generators as backup. That might be 100, well, the number I have is from a Minnesota facility that was 400 megawatts, and they were proposing 400 diesel generators as backup for that facility, and the state of Minnesota said, no, you can't put that many there, it'll affect air quality. Every diesel generator is tested once a month to verify it works, so it has like an air quality issue that goes further than your own community. So these are all things that are like brand new to us and we need to understand to move forward, which is why it's good to have other folks thinking about how to get around these issues.
Thank you, Kathy. We're so lucky to have you in these conversations. So thank you for being in them and sharing what's going on. Paul, at the Nelson Institute, you guys are doing research projects and starting to understand some of these questions. You did receive funding from QTS as well. Could you share some about that partnership and the short and long-term goals of some of these research projects?
Right, so when we were approached by QTS to ask questions about what UW-Madison could do to inform some of these decisions or investigate what the impacts of this infrastructure might look like, we did a poll, basically. So it isn't just Nelson, it's the entirety of the community. It's the data science folks, it's engineering, it's the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and we said, ollie Oxenfree, who's working on this? And if we got nothing else out of the QTS relationship, it was a very clear picture that there is a vast amount of research and expertise across the UW-Madison that can help us understand the downstream impacts of this industry and its implications. So the obvious things are aggregate energy demand modeling, kind of coming to terms with these big numbers. I just heard this morning that coal plant retirements, the rate of coal plant retirements, decreased this last year for the first time in living memory, right? Well, since the growth period. I don't know if AI is a piece of that, but it can't help. Everything you suggested suggests it can't help. So aggregate energy demand is there, but what I want to say is that the rest of the university is working on entirely different and almost more compelling questions, in my point of view, that are related to how these things function within their ecosystem. And I mean that, I guess, figuratively and literally. Figuratively in the energy ecosystem, which is to say that these facilities don't just turn on with a switch and then run at an even rate. They are, as Kathy put it recently to me, lumpy. That is, the intermittency of demand, how AI actually operates, its energy signature is wildly uneven. And this has grid stability implications and broader questions with implications for communities that depend on the same grid, right, for power. So you want all those energy analysis and policy people like Tracy Holloway and others at work on this question. But it goes past that. The literal and not figurative ecosystem is also affected by something the size that was described by Anna a moment ago. So what are the ecosystem effects? What happens to habitat? What happens to forest ecosystems if you're displacing agriculture? What is lost or gained in that trade-off? All those things are actually pretty big unknowns, and they have to be investigated pretty rigorously. And dozens of researchers came out to answer that call. Like, the campus is primed and ready to do work on what this looks like. And I think, and we'll say last piece on this, the two pieces on that is when we put that in front of QTS, I think that raised their eyebrows as much as ours. I think we were surprised at the level of participation in this kind of research. And they said, well, then here's how much we give you. I should have asked for 3 times as much. Right? There was a real interest in getting answers to these questions because the industry wants the answers to these questions too. We believe it's better to do it at the UW than to do it at some third party, not fully public, undisclosable research site. We think the University of Wisconsin-Madison doesn't just want QTS, we want absolutely every data center developer to come through Madison to do their work, and they'd be wise to do so. And I don't think this is the last contract. The second thing is, I think we're thinking about future designs and not just this design. So what you see in the picture, this giant monster of an infrastructure, I don't know if that's what that's going to look like in 10 years. It doesn't have to look that way. It may be more energy intensive and smaller. It could be bigger and more energy intensive. It could be greener in ways that are not just about energy. It could be about what the actual physical infrastructure looks like. Does it provide habitat for migratory waterfowl? That's not crazy. What is its heat signature? Which is right now a question of hot debate in the literature. We've got satellite images that can tell us that. So what I've learned in our time with QTS is how good your university is at being ahead of questions that are going to come calling later. Because those people were not working for QTS, they were working on this already. And that is encouraging. I know there's a lot of discouragement in this conversation. I understand why. But the university has surprised me with its capacity to be ahead of the curve.
Thank you, Paul. Speaking of 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line, Anna, data centers aren't going to last forever. Can you share some about the lifespan and kind of how we should be thinking about that as we have these conversations?
Yes, happily. So planning for data centers, everything that goes in and around a data center is a piece of engineered equipment, which all has a very specific design life. So if you look at the building shell itself, all the stuff that's needed to cool the data center, deliver power to it, these things typically have about a 25-year design life. If you go into the data center, the design life is significantly shorter, especially if you're looking at the highly technical equipment like the GPUs, the graphical processing units that make the AI go. These things have typically a 3 to 5 year design life, which is not to mention the shortened life that happens with technology improvements. This is just how long it's engineered to be useful, actually. So this means that even if everything goes absolutely perfectly, you can expect turnover inside the data center to be happening at a cadence of about every 5 years. A hyperscale data center will typically have more than 10,000 server racks, which means you have more than 10,000 GPUs, which means you have a significant pile of e-waste to contend with every 5 years. Outside the data center, you have now this building shell that has to be rehabbed and dealt with. So there are a lot of open questions around, even if everything goes absolutely according to plan, how to do end-of-life decommissioning on a product like this. So this is something to definitely be considering when we enter into contracts, municipal, county level, whatever kind of contracts for building data centers, having a good plan for data center decommissioning when the time comes. And that's if everything goes exactly according to plan, which here in Wisconsin, we know doesn't always happen. So there's also the kind of counterpoint question of what to do if the project goes belly up and we have this brownfield site that needs to be remediated. And that's a different question entirely, but one that also warrants a close contractual eye before we enter into these things.
Kathy, could you share about how you view the role of transparency and access to information when you're looking at development of data centers and building that trust between developers, governments, and communities?
Sure. So transparency is one of my favorite things. I talk about it a lot. Tell everybody that transparency is a good thing. And partly I preach transparency because we're in a complicated moment. We're in a moment where our trust in institutions and each other is at a historic low. And that means that if you get surprised by some news about some new thing in your community, you're more likely to think the worst than you might have been a decade ago when you went, oh, they were probably really busy figuring that out and just didn't announce it yet, kind of thing, or whatever. So we're in a moment where there is this lack of trust, and transparency is a strong antidote to that. If I am completely forthright with you, then we can slowly build a bit of trust there. The other thing, though, that's a challenge here is there is an information imbalance. So Anna's been talking about all these kind of statistics in terms of, and remember she said, well, we know it's 4.3 gigawatts. Is that 4.5? 4,500. 4,500. Yeah, 4.5 gigawatts. And she couldn't turn that into energy use because it is lumpy, but it's also a thing that, like, we don't have access to public information to know that stuff. So we're in these conversations, and sometimes it's a village of Cassville with 400 people. And on the other side of the table is big tech with lots of lawyers in fancy suits. And when you ask questions about, well, I asked the question, how many diesel generators will there be in DeForest? And they said, it depends. We don't know who all of our clients will be yet. And I get that it depends, but I was like, don't ever say it depends to me. Tell me, like, give me a range. It'll be 400 to 500 or 10,000, but don't, like, tell me it depends. But so this is a very complicated negotiation because local governments were kind of caught a little flat-footed. We don't have zoning for data centers. And now they know what they're going to probably do, but we don't know exactly what they're going to do. There is no public information that helps us. And folks kind of assume the worst about folks who are figuring things out on their behalf. So it is a really hard time to do this. I mean, my friends and colleagues in our local municipalities who are trying to sort through specific things are trying very hard to figure this all out, but there is an imbalance in information, and the pressure from all sides is extreme. And this is the tech world, so they want it to be built yesterday. So they're pushing, let's move a lot faster. That's not where governments are comfortable. It's a quagmire.
Kathy, how do you feel about NDAs?
Oh, I hate NDAs.
Non-disclosure agreements.
Non-disclosure agreements. We had a grant opportunity a while back, and they said, oh, but you're going to have to sign an NDA. And I said, we're not going to take the money. And they're like, don't you want to talk to your legal? And I'm like, I don't need to talk to my legal. We don't sign NDAs. We're a county. Anything I do is transparent. They came around on their NDA because they wanted us to do the work.
So Anna, one of the tools that's out there is a community benefits agreement. Could you explain that and how they're showing up in the context of development centers?
Yeah, happy to. So a community benefit agreement is a formally negotiated agreement between a municipality or space entity and the developer owner of a data center. And these come from offshore wind is the sector where these were most prominent. It happened in when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. Any wind farm wanting to receive funding from the IRA was required to negotiate a community benefits agreement with any of the communities adjacent to the wind farm. And these things were fantastically successful in the space of offshore wind. They not only allowed, but statutorily mandated communities to come to the negotiating table and ask for what they wanted in return for housing this piece of infrastructure. And to my earlier point from my presentation, if you think we need data centers, which you may, they have to go somewhere. Someone has to soak it. And what the community benefit agreement does is it allows that person who soaks it to get something in return for it. And these things can include all manner of arrangements. So towns can ask for things like, and have asked for things like, town benefit funds, just lump sums of money. There's a really quite robust community benefits agreement negotiated in the town of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, between their big hyperscale data center, where they get 2 lump sums of $10 million, 5 years apart, in addition to a whole bunch of other stuff: brownfield remediation, regreening of certain districts, contractually mandated construction schedules, jobs guarantees. Like, the sky's the limit what you can ask for in these things. There are other community benefits agreements that ask for like really bizarre stuff. I read recently about the town of Ellendale, North Dakota, where in their community benefit agreement, the data center developer rehabilitated their local bowling alley. So like like nothing is not on the table. These developers, these guys are rich. They have the money. We just have to ask. So this is like my favorite thing to talk and think about how we empower local communities to figure out what it is they want, who needs to be in the room when they ask for it, and how to properly situate the ask.
Can I just on that, this is another information thing where we as local governments need to figure out how to talk to each other because Ellendale should have gotten a lot more than the bowling alley rehabbed. You know, this is like we've been in a scrappy place for a long time, so we're thinking, oh, I bet if we ask them for $500,000, that'll be huge. And it's like, dudes, you could have gotten $25 million kind of thing. And so really, we need to be a lot more strategic about, and we need to do, when we cannot stop a project, we should take the benefits from the project. We shouldn't on principle go, well, we were opposed to that because, like, how does that help your community?
You can get a hospital or a community college.
And I think, Paul, Anna, if you don't mind sharing.
Two quick questions related to both of the things that were just said. One is that where the end-of-life remediation stipulations go? Because I'm very excited about the idea of end-of-life planning for all infrastructure. And yet I don't think we have a lot of precedent for it. I mean, the Gates rubber facility in Denver, where I grew up, is still sitting there, right? And so I wonder, where does that go? What is our precedent? Bethlehem Steel, nobody gave them a contract with a plan for that facility. What exists to us now that we can implement, and what has to be created out of whole cloth as a precedent for other kinds of infrastructure development? And are these community development, the community agreements, the place for this, or is that the wrong instrument? And finally, as a geographer, I don't understand how a community development agreement, or support, what is it, community benefits agreement, is really great for the town with the bowling alley, but if you're right, and the infrastructural energy demands are distributed well outside of the domain of that, the escaped costs that are distributed will not be captured in that community benefits agreement. So what are the other instruments? What are the policy instruments available to us?
So the second one is big, and I'm going to let Anna do that. The first one on the example we have is utility scale solar. So some communities are developing community benefits agreements there where the solar developer is setting up an escrow to pay for the kind of returning that land to farmland at the end of the solar project kind of thing. And it's evolved to be, there has to be an escrow because your company could go out of business. You know, the Janesville GM plant is the local example of they could just abandon a site. And so there has to be money on the table.
You've asked exactly the right question about whether the end of life is negotiated into the community benefit agreements, and I will say in the wind sector, it was not adequately addressed. That is still an open question. It does exist in some of the data center agreements. Notably, there is a bit about that in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania agreement, but it is understudied, not particularly there's not really robust research around it, and I think that QTS would do well to fund research into that, and I'd be happy to do it.
So Paul, my next question is for you. This is a bit adjacent. Schools and universities are navigating AI adoption internally among schools, among students and staff. How is UW navigating this, and what kind of guidance or structures are you guys starting to look at for that use of AI?
I'd prefer to discuss community benefit agreements. So everybody understands the thing about universities is not only they're filled with smart faculty and scientists and researchers, they're filled with really smart students. Students are way ahead on this. They're bringing their technological knowledge into the classroom. This is happening one way or another and at its rates that are shocking to the faculty, frankly. And the responses are uneven in the way that UW-Madison is uneven as a confederated, distributed, experimental, sprawling enterprise. Like how people are dealing with AI would take us as long as you've got to talk to every faculty member on campus. So some people are embracing the technology. I want to be clear that some people are using it in their assignments. They're abandoning a lot of modes of assessment that they've used in the past. Some faculty have really gotten aggressive about mandating its use in the classroom. Others are this is probably what I go. Oral exams only, blue books. You know, it's 1998 all over again in my playbook. And that's okay, right? It depends on what's happening. And I think that the BASCM, the central administration, wants to be capacity building, to make sure that people know the range of tools at their disposal. And as such, we have just this spring put online a centralized committee to kind of take stock of all the ways that AI is entering the classroom, to take a look at best practices, to do a train the trainers way of making sure that our faculty are where they need to be, tied to some experiments with mandating some AI literacy amongst the students, so they understand where this comes from, physically and in terms of IP, and where it's going. So what you're going to see out of BASCM is what you often see in a good way at UW-Madison, which is some guideposts on best practice, some limits on the most egregious cases, and then a lot of inflorescence of experimentation. And on last note on this, I wanted to shout out to Dr. Soyun Shim, who is the Dean of the School of Human Ecology. They are way ahead on this. They have had campus-wide or college-wide conversations with their students and their faculty on the appropriate use. They're getting people's diverse opinions, and they're putting them into a kind of playbook of a range of 4 or 5 ways that you can manage this in your classroom to get the kind of learning outcomes you want. And if the whole campus can perform as well as the School of Human Ecology, this ratchets my worry down a lot. Last point I'd make is this is not the first time technological changes come to the classroom, and the sky is not falling. I'm a glass half full guy. I don't think we've dealt with cheating before. We are interested in developing people's ideas. This is not going to cause the atrophy of a generation's brains. I don't believe that, and I've got a 10-year-old, so it's a living experiment.
Kathy, what are some meaningful ways that individuals can get involved? There's so much interest in this topic.
Yeah, so I do think, I think it's good to be at forums. I think it's good to be having conversations about these things. I do think, to pick up a thread from something someone else said, it's important to be talking about data centers, but also how we use AI and how we use it, because we are Dane County here. We have a bunch of industries and a university who are going to use AI to do amazing things. It is, to me, unrealistic and unfair for us to say, but we don't want any of those data centers cluttering up our county, put them somewhere else. That is not a fair and equitable way to do this. How do we do all of this right? But it's also a conversation about how we do AI right. So I encourage everybody to have a conversation with someone in your personal network about how they're thinking about these things. I've been stunned in my own conversations where I've got friends and colleagues who use AI in their work and are like, nope, no data centers in Dane County. And I'm like, dude, that doesn't fit together. You've got to harmonize this a little bit. I also think it's super important for folks to be engaged in the politics of this, where those politics happen. So supporting zoning updates at the local level, but if we're talking about how to make sure energy rates are fair and that these distributed issues about it's not just one community, a bunch of communities, those are probably state level conversations. And I think we're going to have a lot of discussion probably in the next legislature about data centers and what kind of state policy. There are other states like Minnesota who put together some pretty good legislation to protect everybody and create a common floor. We need to be having those conversations with our representatives too.
So Anna, what do you see as the best possible thing AI could do? It's probably not more cat videos, but what are some of the things that you are kind of seeing as maybe a good outcome of this?
One thing is that I think it's really foregrounded our conversations around the electrical grid and what it needs. And I think this could be an opportunity to build good, lasting infrastructure that is green and clean and sees us through the next 100 years and more. That would be a really good outcome. In terms of AI, the tool and what it could do, I love to think about this question. OpenAI came out with all of these, AI is going to save the world, riches beyond our wildest imagination, no man hungry, etc. I think that in that vein, the best thing that AI is going to do is provide really, really accurate and long-range weather forecasting. I think that that is going to save more lives than anything else I can describe. Having really, really good weather forecasts is just, I don't need to explain it. It's going to be revolutionary.
Thank you. All right, we are going to turn to the audience. We have time for some questions, and then we're going to do one final kind of closing remarks. Sam is going to walk around. We are not going to have time for all of your questions. We will do our best.
Yeah, so we're going to limit one question per person just so I can get to as many people, and then we'll be passing out their contact information on the follow-up email, and they'll be sticking around. And wait till I bring the mic to you so that we can get it for the recording and other people can hear.
Hi, my name's Kaylin. Thank you all for being here today. Anna kind of just touched on this as well as Kathy, but my question is, do we know if there's any information out there right now that shows that grid upgrades required by hyperscale data centers have had any benefit to residential customers, such as they're going to need possibly a whole substation? Is this going to increase the capacity for neighboring homes that maybe want to install solar on there, and the current substation doesn't have capacity for that to be exported to the grid?
I don't know this young woman, and I didn't plant that question. For those of you thinking that there are a couple of proposals out there in the universe. Rewiring America has one called Homegrown Energy, where instead of building new power plants, data centers and utilities could finance more solar on rooftops. And the math seems to work out regionally that you could do this, especially if you include like commercial and residential buildings getting a subsidy. Remember we talked about this all being lumpy. There's a whole batteries and this could benefit the grid, certainly in terms of us using the grid more fully. We talk about grid utilization. The latest study says the grid is less than 50% utilized nationally. So if we can fit that lumpy data center load into an existing grid in a way that increases utilization, it's like filling more seats on the plane. It's more cost effective to make the flight, everybody pays less in theory. So there's a path there, but we have to be deliberate, and we have to understand the data.
Great job. John Imes, Wisconsin Environmental Initiative. We work with the Clean Economy Coalition of Wisconsin. They developed a data center framework that basically the tenets were 100% clean energy, 30% on-site for Wisconsin-based renewables, closed-loop water systems. In terms of the cost structure, not just fair sharing of the costs, the infrastructure costs and the energy costs, full sharing, and then enforceable community benefit agreements. So a great discussion. Kathy, I'll start with you, and anyone else can chime in. You talked about how we can green these facilities. And so what I worry about as the tech industry is, what do? They move fast and break things. Our legislature is not meeting until next January. And so we have to signal our expectations in terms of what these things look like, how they're going to operate, and give them our wish list. And so if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of the green.
And I think there's a local opportunity to influence those things, but you can't under Wisconsin law, you can't say that this new facility we're allowing has to meet a certain efficiency standard or something else. I mean, we have statewide building codes, we're not allowed to mandate those things. We were pushing for battery backup instead of diesel generators. We were pushing for geothermal heat pumps instead of traditional evaporative cooling, kind of arguing that Wisconsin's cold and we should take advantage of that cold kind of thing. That's all influence, though. There's very little. Why the Clean Economy Coalition is working at the state level is because policy has to be set there. It can't be set locally.
Hello. Thanks for your presentation. I have way more questions than there are in this room, and I'll probably talk to some of you afterwards. I brought something from a Life magazine from 1972. I don't know if you're familiar with Edmund Faltermeyer's work, who wrote a lot of environmental stuff about energy use back in the 60s and 70s. And his article in this Life magazine is, do we really need all those kilowatts? Well, we're not even talking kilowatts anymore. I didn't even understand all the megawatts and stuff. But he does say at the end of this that electricity will be costlier, but that should encourage us to put our limited kilowatts where they are really needed. The era of gluttony can pass unlamented into history. I do not believe that has come forward. I believe we are going into a bigger era of gluttony. And I think that he is rolling in his grave right now, only having died about 23 years ago. The direct question I have for you is about your four, Anna mentioned the four things that are most discussed about these. I did not see the environment on there. And I think that is the number one thing that is discussed right now.
I'm going to let Anna take this. I want to say something that both totally reinforces what you said and then probably antagonizes you terribly. The first is, I think that's absolutely right. I think the hidden costs in these things are in the design in ways that we don't fully appreciate or understand. They're in the scale of the footprint is enormous, right? And then, of course, the energy is what we always talk about, but the energy itself has a footprint. All these things are environmental, and it's not simply water. If they got to be somewhere, they probably should be in Wisconsin, not in Arizona, where I used to live. The environmental footprints, but the opportunities are there, so I just want to emphasize that when you can control that big a piece of land and mandate the conditions under which it is rolled out and even retired, you're way ahead of the game relative to ad hoc planning, which has destroyed habitats for endangered and non-endangered species all over this state. You've got a real chance with these things, this is maybe the more controversial point, to mandate those. The second thing I'll say is every prediction of smallification has failed. So I think that it's not that I've given up on degrowth. My degrowth brothers and sisters hate me for even surrendering, but the scaling of all of this can be done in a smart way. That's my feeling. And that when things tend to decrease, like coal plants, or if you're worried about human population, stop, it's all taken care of itself. And by taking care of itself, I mean the structural conditions change for the demand of these things. And so for me, my thing about 1972 is the smallification is exactly where they got it wrong. Otherwise, they'd have seen this coming. And the environmental movement, there I'm going to be bold, that is worried about endangered species and water and the distribution of health benefits and costs to diverse populations needs to deal with growth and the capacity building that comes with it. And that is the most controversial thing I will say today, as opposed to crossing your fingers and hoping for degrowth. Benefits should go to tribal communities, to historically marginalized communities. That's where the energy is needed. If we're going to blow off the top of our energy system, let's get the energy into those communities. That's my semi-white flag.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If I can address my chart, I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain here. When I was putting that together, thinking about the discourse, I wanted to start with benefit and then add in risk because I'm predisposed to thinking about the risk, and I wanted to be even-handed. I put that chart together thinking about benefit, and the reason environment didn't show up there, I'm realizing this right now, by the way, so I appreciate you calling it out, is because there are no environmental benefits.
All right.
Under current design. Yeah, I think to Paul's point.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to have a final question to our panelists up there.
That's a lot of pressure for the last question. Hi, I'm Jessica Price. I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Manager at the City of Madison. I work closely with Kathy, Nelson alum. Thank you, Paul. My question, I'll make a statement, and then I'll ask the question first, though, is that a la the Wisconsin ideal, I think local governments are very interested in learning as you're going from the university. We're all asking the same questions that researchers in the university are asking. And so my question is, how is the whole cadre of folks that you identified, how are you currently working with local government around Wisconsin to share what you're learning, to get their input and to kind of have that exchange? The City of Madison has a moratorium right now on data centers so that we have time to update our zoning code. We have started looking into community benefits agreements. There are some limitations at the state level for the ability for local governments to sign those kinds of agreements with any kind of organization, including data center developers. And so community benefits agreements sound great, but like, what are similar yet different things that we see from around the country that are working to achieve the same ends? Because barring a change in state level policy, there may be true limitations for local governments to be able to extract any kind of benefits we have. And as another person who's disposed, it's kind of my job to think worst case scenario, it would be really great to have some examples of what happens when they don't live up to their end of the bargain. If you think of how much capacity and wealth and influence these organizations have right now, when it comes to the need to eventually stand up to some of those agreements, if someone isn't holding up their end of the bargain, they're going to be vastly more resourced than local governments. And so if there are tools to hold folks accountable, we would love to hear about those too.
I can say one thing, which is I have been traveling around the state with UW Extension, speaking in the local and tribal government AI forums about kind of a longer version of what I shared here today about all the ins and outs and a lot of the kind of economic and legislative considerations around data center development. So it's been an honor and a pleasure to connect with town leaders and town workers, tribal workers all over the state. So that's one thing. And specifically to your question about community benefit agreement, I'm going to say this now. It's like in preliminary planning, but I think you'll like it. We are working to put together a series of workshops or something over the summer together with the UW Extension, what are they called? The legal liaisons to towns and many other stakeholders to build a toolkit for community benefits to address exactly these questions, because it is an evolving landscape and you can't have a static contract on top of that. So we need some like strong legal minds and local representatives, and I would love it if you would come.
All right, we're going to close now with the final question, and then I'll just go down the line, starting with you, Paul. What is your vision for what data centers should be doing to be more sustainable?
So it's changed in the last 25 minutes. Because I believe we don't understand a lot about how these things function in their broader ecosystem. I actually, that's what researchers always say. We need more research. But I think we're only coming to terms with what they would look like so that we could design them so they could be sustainable, as opposed to design them away or put a moratorium on their construction, but not on the AI we're using in the city of Madison, just on the construction of the costs. My design vision is to have a design vision. We're not allowed. Design is such an anti-principle in American development and municipal scale development in particular, right? I mean, that's what I imagine, and that it should set a precedent for how we develop everything else going forward, because this is the beginning of 21st century infrastructure. So that is not much of a vision, it's just a call for a vision. There's also an energy law clinic coming online at the UW Law School with the Nelson Institute's Energy Analysis and Policy program. It'll be the first of its kind, and the clinic is meant for individuals, communities, municipalities, anybody who wants to consult. This is a law clinic, so it's a service to deal with exactly these questions, to help build the legal infrastructure, to hold accountable partners in industry who want to build this stuff out. So I do actually think that the university has a continuing role here.
Sustainability in data centers. Yes, I think addressing this lumpiness of the grid question is going to be the big one. So data centers are demand shock, using extreme, like high throughput compute at peak time is really, really bad. So I think that there are ways to address this through like, demand response, like grid end ways to address it. There are algorithmic ways to address it, and then there are business ways to address it. So there are kind of three stakeholders in the room there. So thinking about how we can use data centers in a way that smooths the grid instead of more deeply entrenches the bumps.
Yeah, and I think my vision is similar to what Anna's saying there, that I do think this is a moment. For decades, we've had what I would call at best a tepid effort around demand response in our state, and now there's a really big need to get serious about this and figure it out and do it right. And sometimes you need a crisis to get people off the sidelines to really figure stuff out. I think that we have a kind of momentum now in Wisconsin where there is so much interest. There are folks all over saying, hey, we have to do this right if we're going to do it, that we have a real opportunity to do some of the things Paul talked about earlier in terms of how do we design these things so that they benefit us versus hurting us. I mean, when I think about AI, often the analogy I think about is the Industrial Revolution. And it was not a thing that you could go, well, we're just not going to do that. Okay, a small group of people said that and went off in the hills. They're not the dominant voice today. It took us a significant amount of time in the Industrial Revolution, 30, 40 years, to get from we're going to do things in factories to we're going to have safeguards so that people are protected in this new system. I'd like to think we can do that a little faster here. And this is the moment that is our opportunity. So I think my vision is we grab that opportunity and figure this out and have the future we want, because things are in flux and those are the moments when you can change what happens.
Well, thank you, everyone. The speakers will remain up here for more questions. We are going to share their slides, their contact information, and a recording of the program. We'll get an email out as soon as possible with the resources. The recording will probably come later this week. We also are using majority reusable silverware and cutlery and plates, so please put those in the kitchen. Your name tags will also get reused. You can leave those on the same table where you got them to begin with. And lastly, I hope that you enjoyed the program. To support future Sustainable Breakfast Series programs, please consider a donation to Sustain Dane so we can help bring together expert panelists like this and continue being this place of learning and connection. Enjoy Earth Month, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.